Sanctions, more explanation, and an investigation. The aftermath of a Western airstrike in Syria continues to dominate headlines. In Europe, foreign ministers say Syria may face more punishment over an alleged chemical attack near its capital of Damascus. Foreign ministers of the European Union issued a joint statement following the meeting. It warns the EU will consider further restrictive measures against Syria. It also says it supports all efforts aimed at preventing the use of chemical weapons. The United States, Britain, and France launched airstrikes on facilities it says were related to chemical weapons production. The military action was in response to what the West alleges was a chemical attack carried out by Syria's government. The country's President Bashar al-Assad has denied it took place. France's president says the airstrike over the weekend was both legitimate and successful. Emmanuel Macron made the comments on a French news program.
France and its allies didn't declare war on Assad's regime. We conducted the attack so that international law and UN Security Council resolutions will be observed.
Macron said the operation destroyed the Syrian government's ability to produce chemical weapons. He also said he had convinced the U.S. president to keep his troops in the war-torn country. Syria's civil war has killed hundreds of thousands and displaced millions. The battle has drawn in world powers including Russia, an ally of Assad. Macron says he's intent on reaching a political end to the conflict.
The global chemical weapons watchdog said Monday its team has not yet been able to visit the site of an alleged chemical attack last week near Syria's capital. The head of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons said Russian and Syrian officials have informed their inspectors that there's still pending security issues to be worked out before any deployment could take place to Duma. In Moscow, Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said the mission was not allowed in because it lacked approval from the United Nations Department for Safety and Security. UN officials in New York disputed the claim. Earlier, Russia rejected British allegations it's hindering the investigation of the alleged chemical attack and said it wants a fact-finding mission to move ahead. Reporter Charles Maines in Moscow tells me about the Russian denial that it's hampering the chemical weapons probe.
Russia thinks that all these chemical weapons are a hoax to begin with. This is somehow either terrorists on the ground or pro-Western backed rebels or perhaps just fakery serve Western interests. It essentially the U.S. and its partners a pretext to carry out these airstrikes against the government of Bashar al-Assad. So that's the beginning here. And they also say that they've always been calling for an objective investigation into this alleged chemical weapons attack. Certainly the Russian argument in terms of criticizing this attack is always really focused on the timing. They say that just as this international team from the Organization for Prevention of Chemical Weapons was on the ground to investigate these charges of chemical weapons use in Duma, the day before this starts, then we have these airstrikes by the U.S. and its partners. So from the very beginning, they've been insisting that this is all just fake news, and they say that in terms of not providing access, they say this also is a lie.
Well, it seems interesting that Moscow is saying it wants an impartial investigation, but it seems as though this Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, that would be fairly impartial.
Right. I mean, they've broken down. The Russians have always been calling for these investigations, saying that if they can actually get people on the ground to look at these issues, they'll find out that, in fact, either these charges are groundless, that there were no chemical weapons there. That's the one hand. On the other hand, they've run into problems working with some of these international organizations. They, for example, say that this previous report that was done by the OPCW, this Chemical Weapons Investigators Unit, they say that they essentially never got down on the ground in Syria, even though the Russians were offering them access, and therefore their conclusions when they said that Bashar al-Assad had in fact used chemical weapons in the past, they called those findings essentially not true. And so this has always been a problem for them. In terms of what's happening down at Duma right now in Syria, the Russians will say that they will provide access. They said they've done nothing to block access from these international inspectors, and they haven't tampered with the site, which is what the U.S. has been accusing them of.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov spoke with the BBC, and then he was mentioning the airstrikes that were conducted by the U.S., Britain, and France, and he repeated what has been seen as a Russian assertion that two-thirds of the more than 100 missiles fired into Syria failed to reach their targets. And he also said that the communication between Russia and the West is at its worst point since the Cold War. There seems to be increasing division there between Russia and the West.
That's certainly true. Yes, I mean, in this interview, he once again guaranteed that Russia hadn't tampered with this chemical weapons site. But in terms of just the wider Russian West or Russian-U.S. relations, of course, Lavrov was saying that, look, this is basically that any ounce of trust that existed between them is almost gone at this point. In terms of these charges, all this whole story with Syria is kind of broken down into parallel universes, frankly, where you have the Western U.S. and its Western allies saying one version of events, which is largely based on what they hear from rebel groups on the ground and from international observers. Then there's also what the Russians and the Syrian government say. And so whether we're talking about the use of chemical weapons, they split completely on that issue, or even these airstrikes where the U.S. Defense Department says they hit with precision and all these targets were destroyed. And then you have the Russians and the Syrians saying that, in fact, they managed to knock nearly 75% of them out of the sky using Soviet-era air defense systems. And so it's once again this kind of strange divide that we've seen in this Syrian saga the whole time.
Well, later today, the U.S. is expected to unveil new sanctions against Russia. This has not happened at the time we are speaking, but what have been the indications in Moscow, the reaction of this?
Well, they're not happy about it, that's for sure. They're promising it'll come with counter-sanctions once they've had a chance to sort of assess these latest rounds. I mean, keep in mind, this new round of sanctions, should it be forthcoming, and we think it is. Certainly the Trump administration seems to indicate they will announce these today. This will be the third round of sanctions in the last month. So this time aimed at Russian companies who support Assad's chemical weapons program in any facet.
Charles Maines reporting from Moscow.
Vice President Mike Pence has offered justification for the U.S.-led military strike on chemical weapons facilities in Syria. Pence made the remarks in a speech at the Summit of the Americas in Peru on Saturday. The conference brought together leaders of more than 30 countries.
At President Trump's direction, the United States, together with our allies, France and the United Kingdom, launched precision strikes to cripple Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad's chemical weapons program. We acted in response to Assad's horrific use of chemical weapons on his own citizens 1 week ago, an attack that horrified and shocked the conscience of the world. The United States assesses that the Syrian regime was responsible for this attack and that chlorine and possibly nerve agents were used. As President Trump said, these were the crimes of a monster. And together with our allies, we took action in the wake of that barbarism and brutality. And I'm pleased to report that the strike by the United States, UK, and French forces was effective, overwhelming, and successful. We delivered last night a clear and unambiguous message to the Syrian regime. The United States and our allies will not tolerate the use of chemical weapons against innocent men, women, and children. And we are prepared to deter any further use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime. The United States and our allies will continue to integrate all instruments of our national power in this moment. And as President Trump made clear, our nation is ready to sustain this response until the Syrian regime abandons the use of prohibited chemical agents. Assad and his patrons would do well not to test our resolve or the capabilities of the armed forces of the United States. The President also sent a message to the two nations that are most responsible for supporting, equipping, and financing the criminal Assad regime, Russia and Iran. Even now, Russia is deliberately spreading disinformation about Assad's heinous actions and even their own complicity in this crime. But the horrific pictures of dead children, the videos of suffering people, prove what happened. Russia's lies will crumble in the face of truth. And as the President said to both Russia and Iran, nations can be judged by the company they keep. Allow me to take a moment to thank the nations here who've already offered their expressions of support for last night's military action. Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada, President Santos of Colombia, and others, we are grateful for your support. As President Santos said earlier today, he supported the actions to, in his words, punish the use of chemical weapons and seek their total elimination. And we're grateful for that moral clarity. But today, I call upon every nation in this hemisphere of freedom to support this military action taken by the United States and our allies, and to support it publicly. And also to add to that, your condemnation expressed by nearly everyone here of Assad's regime's use of chemical weapons. The civilized world must send a message of resolve and unity that we will not accept such barbaric attacks now or ever.